think that our community knows that these jobs are available and that doing it. So that's probably one of the big
will be starting in 1 minute. We encourage everyone to take their seats. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Good evening and welcome to the Kalayaan Hall of the Philippine Center for an evening of inspiration and women empowerment. We would like to recognize as well those who are watching us on Facebook Live. I am Vice Consul Tanya Ramiro. To start off our program, I'd like to call to the stage our Consul General Elmer G. Cato for his welcome remarks. Sir?
Magandang gabi po sa inyo lahat. Welcome to an evening with distinguished Filipino women, our annual commemoration of International Women's History Month, which we are now resuming for the first time since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic. As we celebrate Women's History Month, please allow us to recognize all our women for their contributions to their homes and communities. I am sure many would agree that women are considered silent heroes, juggling various roles in their professional and personal lives without any fanfare and always endeavoring to rise up to the occasion despite the heavy stress of everyday life. Now, aggravated by the fear and anxiety most of us feel due to the surge in crimes across New York City. Tonight we shine on all our amazing women present who brave the subways and the streets as they continue to find ways to elevate the representation of Filipino-American women in society. Tonight we have invited women who will share their stories on how they are serving as catalysts for change by debunking stereotypes and by disrupting the status quo. We would like to thank Concepcion Montoya, Mayrish Capadan Antonio, Marisa Pizarro, and Nicole Silianteng for taking time out of their busy schedules to share their stories of women empowerment with us. We also would like to thank Lorna Jane Reyes for serving as our moderator. And before I end, I wish to take this opportunity to pay tribute to our Filipina frontliners, our nurses, doctors, and other healthcare workers, as well as our Filipina teachers and educators, and many others who put their lives at stake during the height of the pandemic by being committed to their profession they have chosen. Let's give them a round of applause. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay ang ating kababaihan.
Maraming salamat, Consul General Cato. I will now be introducing our moderator and resource persons, beginning with our moderator. She is an award-winning Filipino actor and entrepreneur. She has a YouTube channel with around 390,000 subscribers and counting, where she is set to publish a mini documentary series called Wonder Stories that will feature the empowering lives of Filipinos from different walks of life. Let us all welcome Ms. Lorna Jane Reyes. Ms. Reyes, please join us on stage. I will now move on to our discussants. She is currently the Senior Director for Fellowship and Global Initiatives at the Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT. Before joining MIT, she served as Director of Fellowship and Leadership Development Programs of the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School for 6 years, where she led a team in designing and implementing leadership programs for more than 130 graduate fellows from across the world. She was also the interim executive director of the Women and Public Policy Program of Harvard Kennedy School. In the Philippines, she served in various capacities as a lawyer, including being Deputy Legal Counsel of Silliman University, Director of the Dr. Jovito R. Salonga Center for Law and Development, and a faculty member of the Silliman University College of Law. She also had a stint as an elected local legislator where she led social innovation programs. She currently serves on the board of the Harvard Club of the Philippines Global and Save One Life, an international nonprofit serving children with hemophilia in developing countries worldwide. She holds a degree in political science and a Bachelor of Laws both from Silliman University, a Master of Laws in Government Procurement from the George Washington University Law School as a Fulbright Scholar, and a Master in Public Administration from the Harvard Kennedy School, receiving the Vernon and Littauer Awards for Academic Excellence. In 2019, she received the Outstanding Sillimanian Award in Global Leadership, the Harvard Kennedy School Dean's Award, and the Harvard Heroes, the premier university-wide employee recognition program of the said university. Let us all welcome Attorney Mayrish Cadapan Antonio. Our next resource person is a partner at Hinshaw and Culbertson, a national full-service law firm with offices throughout the United States. She is the only Filipino-American partner in a firm of over 400 lawyers. Other than her legal practice, she is deeply involved with diversity and inclusion efforts in the legal community. She is a founding member and a past president of the Filipino-American Lawyers Association of New York. She is a board member of the National Association of Women Lawyers and co-chair of its Diversity Committee. She is also a member of the board of directors of Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund and a former board member of the LGBT Bar Association of Greater New York. She is a former co-chair of the LGBTQ network of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association as well. She also served as a co-chair of the litigation committee of the Asian American Bar Association of New York for several years. She was recognized as one of the nation's best lawyers of color in 2019 and awarded by the Team United Maharlika Foundation as one of the 2019 Outstanding Foreign Workers in the field of law. In 2017, the Asian Pacific American Law Students Association of Brooklyn Law School presented her with a Distinguished Alumni Award. Prior to joining Hinshaw, she was an assistant corporation counsel
I also
in the
wanted
Special
to
Federation
tell you a little bit about
Litigation Division
myself.
of the Office of the Corporation Counsel of the City of New York, where she accomplished a record of undefeated federal jury trials defending municipal employees and civil rights cases. In 2004, she received the Municipal Affairs Award for Outstanding Achievement in the New York City Law Department from the Municipal Affairs Committee of the Association of the Bar of the City of New York. Before attending Brooklyn Law School, where she obtained her Juris Doctor, she obtained a Master's of Divinity from the Union Theological Seminary in New York, concentrating on feminist theology and ethics. Her master's thesis on undocumented immigration and ethics garnered academic distinction. She received her undergraduate degree from New York University, where she was a co-captain of the varsity debate team. Prior to immigrating to the United States, she was a student at the Philippine Science High School and graduated valedictorian from Assumption. Attorney Concepcion Montoya. Our third panelist works in the field of smart design and ergonomics. She is an inventive and entrepreneurial product designer, transforming the way things are into the way things should be. Currently, she is a senior product designer at Mark 43, as well as an NYCX Innovation Fellow working on a project with the robotics unit of the Fire Department of New York. She has worked in the world of design and innovation for 15 long years, in the tech space for 7, and has become known for her transparent, collaborative, and guerrilla approach to design and prototyping. In 2014, she redesigned the ever ubiquitous and often confusing parking sign. Since then, 9 cities around the world have piloted it, including Los Angeles, New Haven, and Brisbane. A 60% improvement in compliance has been reported, which has significantly contributed to public convenience. She regularly shares her work at conferences like the GEL Conference, one of the world's best customer experience conferences, Brooklyn JavaScript, one of the world's most popular programming language centers, and with product design teams at various companies. Her work has also been featured in publications like The Atlantic, the National Public Radio or NPR, Wired, Fast Company, and in textbooks published by O'Reilly Media, a leading American learning company that focuses on innovation and technology. She earned her Bachelor of Science in Management Integration Systems at Ateneo de Manila University and her Master of Fine Arts in Interaction Design at the School of Visual Arts here in New York. She enjoys mentoring new designers and is invited to serve as judge at Parsons School of Design and the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation at Columbia University. Ms. Nicole Silianteng. We actually have one more honoree, however, she has to address an urgent matter, so unfortunately, she will not be able to join us, Ms. Marisa Pizarro. However, she sent us a recorded message, and we will try to play it later on. So now I'd like to give the floor to our moderator, Ms. LJ Reyes, to start the dialogue.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yeah, loud and clear. First of all, I want to thank the Philippine Consulate for having me here tonight. It's such an honor to be with these amazing ladies. And these women have excelled in their fields. And not only that, they have also, I'm sure, influenced and continue to be inspiring to a lot of people in your community and the whole Filipino community. Could you, one by one, give us a brief background of your story about your career, how you started? You want to go ahead, Myrish?
Sure. I would, do you want us to take the podium when we do this, or are you comfortable with us doing this here, Connie?
Being the lawyers that we are, we of course prepared.
We of course spent maybe the wee hours of the night drafting and redrafting what we were going to say. So let's not waste those precious, well, if this is billable hour, but it's not. So yes, please do.
Okay.
I'd love to hear your story.
So, yeah, just as a matter of context, we were requested to prepare something 3 to 5 minutes to introduce ourselves. So, not only because we're lawyers, but we are Filipinas who want to be prepared. And I did not spend the wee hours, but
I can take the mic for you.
Maayong gabi, magandang gabi, good evening. Conjen Elmer, Ma Melanie, and everyone here present tonight. I come before you deeply humbled and honored to share this moment that celebrates the many contributions that Filipino women have made in this part of the United States. A little over 7 years ago, my family and I moved from our hometown of Dumaguete City in the central Philippines to Boston. I was just accepted to the Master of Public Administration program at the Kennedy School, and for our hemophiliac twin boys, who were then 10, it was time to introduce them to the possibilities of a near normal life with adequate medical care. I was a mid-career professional and had lived in the Philippines all my life, save for study and travels for pleasure abroad. Before coming to Boston, I had worked for almost 20 years as a lawyer in various capacities, public, private, and in the nonprofit sector, some of which have already been mentioned. I practiced law and taught law both in the fields of corporate, local government, civil, and criminal legal practice, and also served as a pro bono counsel for women victims of violence for 14 years. For 2 terms, I served as an elected local legislator and led social innovation programs for women, children, environmental protection and preservation, solid waste management, regulatory mechanisms, small business support, and ethical leadership. Coming to the United States with my family in 2014 and starting a professional career from ground zero was probably the most challenging experience I have ever had in my life. If not for my supportive in-laws who actually initiated our petition for permanent residence, a close-knit Filipino community at Harvard and our Silliman alumni group, some generous professors who served as mentors and sponsors, my family and I could not have survived the first year or the next steps that came thereafter. I have always found my life's mission as empowering others to become the better versions of themselves, myself included, and catalyzing change, especially for marginalized, underrepresented groups. And my 6 years at the HKS Center for Public Leadership, training the next generation of public leaders, really helped me hone into this mission. The experience inspired me to convene the Pan-Harvard Filipino Network after graduation, a group of students, faculty, and staff originally from across the 12 schools at Harvard to now include those from across the greater Boston area. MIT, Boston University, Boston College, the Hult Business School, the UMass System, Northeastern University, Tufts University, among others. Our goal is to build community, help onboard Filipinos, especially from Manila, who are transitioning to the greater Boston area, while strengthening the Filipino identity while in the US, as a springboard for greater service and impact when they return to the Philippines. Pre-pandemic, we gathered regularly and held events among ourselves and with other stakeholders related to issues that are relevant to our Filipino and global community, including economic development, history, programs for Filipino scientists, information recruitment sessions for study in the US, diversity, equity, inclusion, fundraisers for typhoon victims, and even at the time of the pandemic, to provide support for computers to Philippine schools. Many speak of it as a safe space for themselves, a supportive network of like-minded individuals, and a grounding mechanism to help them remain accountable to their goals of service to our country. Outside of this, I remain active in the bleeding disorders community worldwide. I have since moved to MIT, where I currently run global programs that provide pathways for prosperity by building principled leadership and innovation-driven entrepreneurial ecosystems in developing economies across the world. In my 7 years in the Northeast, I have met so many amazing Filipino women who have inspired me, moved me, mentored me, constructively criticized me, challenged me to do better, be better. I want to share this award with them and for the many more who toil every single day to help others and who may not be seen enough, spoken about enough, heard enough. I simply represent them. We represent the collective accomplishments of our sector in this part of the world. Finally, whatever I have become thus far is solely due to a God who always gives second chances, a family that loves deeply and unconditionally, and a community that supports and thrives, all of whom I will always remain eternally grateful to. We live in challenging times, and for all of us to surmount these and those that are still yet to come, it takes all of us. But tonight, we spotlight the challenge of bias that remains a significant barrier for women's advancement in all facets of society. And so I end by leaving with all of you an excerpt from this year's International Women's Day call to action, and I quote, "Whether deliberate or unconscious, bias makes it difficult for women to move ahead. Knowing that bias exists isn't enough. Action is needed to level the playing field. Collectively, we can all break the bias," unquote. I give the floor to Connie. You good?
I'd like to start just by thanking the Philippine Consulate, the Consul General Cato, thank you, Deputy Consul General Arman Talbo, and Vice Consul Ramiro for this recognition. This recognition is special to me in a deeply personal way.
Because this very role is at the root of my life in this country.
My father, who died in October, was the Bureau of Internal Revenue Attaché in 1982. He was assigned to New York and worked in this building. I won't ever forget the pride I felt when I first saw the word Philippines emblazoned on this building's facade in the middle of the famed Fifth Avenue. It was the first time that my father brought me to the consulate and showed me where he worked. That was also the first time that I took the subway and saw my very first skyscraper, which turned out to be the Grace Building, towering over me as I stepped outside the Fifth Avenue stop on the number 7 train. That was 40 years ago. I was 14 years old. Today I am once more in this building, in Kalayaan Hall, no longer as impressionable, but humbled and grateful for this recognition resulting from an opportunity given to my dad to bring his family to this country, which led to a cascade of opportunities for me and my siblings. It was not always a life of ease. We struggled as we adjusted. We became New Yorkers and Americans, never quite leaving the Filipino behind. And we made hard decisions. It is an immigrant story, likely similar to yours, marked by sacrifice, resilience, and moments of triumph. Ironically, my father was a lawyer himself and a loyal Sigmaro to his dying day, discouraged me from becoming a lawyer in this country. He said, "Anak, hindi ka puti at babae ka." In English, "You are white and you are female, my child." He said those words not because he did not believe in me, as I came to realize it. It was because he knew how cruel this country could be to the other. He articulated what he knew of this country's history and what we know is continuing reality. And in my case, I was very much the other. Yes, the non-white and the female, but not feminine enough. But also the FOB, fresh off the boat, geek, who spoke with an accent in my first few years here and was not cool enough in high school to slip out at night and dance at Brewster Hall. Yeah, I'm dating myself. The student who worked nights and weekends to pay my way in graduate school and law school. The one who remains a devout Catholic while living openly as a gay woman. The Asian face in the courtroom or in the conference room, who is not stereotypically quiet enough or deferential enough. But I suppose I lucked out, because I also came of age when countercultural movements were coming of age and becoming a force. Anti-racism, feminism, gay rights, to name a few. This country was shifting in subtle and not so subtle ways. And I was blessed to have mentors and allies who were believers in the cause and opened doors ushering me in. There was the queer supervisor who taught me the ropes of becoming a trial lawyer while I was in government. The African-American female partner at my law firm who lobbied for my election to partnership. The white male practice leader who was showing me how to lead the employment group in our New York office. And the many Filipino-American lawyers, my dear friends who are here tonight, sitting in the one entire row back there, each highly accomplished, and also Bar Association leaders who use their pens and rhetoric in pushing for recognition and a place at the table in the courtroom, the boardroom, the bench, and the many corridors of power. To whom much is given, much is asked in return. My mother always tells me that. It guides my advocacy and tempers any sense of entitlement or privilege. I am merely but another hand that can open doors and usher others in. My work is continuing. Our work is continuing. And we cannot stop. We should not stop until fathers would no longer feel compelled to caution their daughters about the barriers to becoming their full and best selves, but can rest instead with the confidence that all shall be well. So Dad, tonight, this one's for you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the Philippine Consulate for this honor and for having me here. I didn't know that Vice Consul Ramiro would give
introductions of all of us already, so please bear with me. I might be repeating some of the information that she already gave. Just a short introduction to myself and my background and what got me here. I was actually born in the United States, in Los Angeles, but grew up, was raised in the Philippines from prep all the way to college, where I went to Ateneo. And then came back to the States after, like 1 year after college. And then 5 years later, came here to New York to pursue my graduate studies. And then right now working in the user experience field. So currently, as Vice Consul Ramiro had described, I am a interaction designer, transforming what I like to think of as the way things are into the way things should be. I redesigned the confusing parking signs into one that actually saves drivers from getting a parking ticket, which has been piloted and has been found to increase compliance by 60% and is now in 9 cities around the world. Last year, I was lucky enough to serve as an NYC X Innovation Fellow, with the United States Digital Response, which is an organization that pairs technologists and designers with city government. During that time, my team partnered with the FDNY robotics unit to help design and build a pilot for blood delivery by drone. And I currently work as senior product designer at Mark 43, building tools to help first responders keep their communities safe. I grew up between Chinese, Filipino, and American cultures. And what I have learned during my time in this country is that this actually gives me a unique perspective and way of interacting with the world. Approaching challenges with curiosity instead of combativeness, extreme empathy and malasakit, and the drive to make things better today. To share a quote from photographer Clayton Cubitt, he says, "Find the thing in you that is different, that's as sharp as a diamond and jagged as a razor. Hone that, because that is the thing with which you will cut the world." Thank you.
Longer.
If we talk about it, but I can feel that you have all been through so much. People going back to the Philippines and coming back here, and I'm sure you noticed the difference between the countries, economy, about coming here, earning your life, and experiencing a different environment. Very different from, again, actually earning today. And in Irish, for example, that leaving your career, be it a career and coming here, risking everything to start anew. What would probably be the biggest challenge for all of you, and how did you overcome it? Who wants to start? Nicole?
I don't know what my answer is going to be. Hello? I would say for me, it's a personality thing, where I'm often told you're too nice. And I feel like like that's a challenge for me, because in the Philippines, I feel like being nice is like a very desired trait, and you're kind of raised to be like that. But now you're in a different environment where that is not actually what gets you ahead, right? Or what makes you successful. And so for me, I've tried to, I think it's just like grappling with how to deal with that, and you become like a completely different person, or how to adjust to that. And some of the ways that I've been able to actually use that to my advantage is to, I feel, kind of using I think a lot of immigrants, having come from somewhere else, they do a lot of context switching because they've been in so many different environments, and so they can see certain situations from different points of view where someone maybe who just grew up in the States doesn't really see. And so kind of using that ability to observe and see the different points of view and approach things in kind of a using like soft power in a way, or kind of figuring out how to get around things in not such a head-on kind of way. Yeah.
It's always a good teacher when you're exposed to a lot of different experiences, right?
Mhm.
And that's what you're saying, that it helped you become who you are today, and you're using it for your career, as right?
Yeah. So I think trying to figure out how to change the things that you do need to change, but then also understanding what is actually unique about your experience and how you were brought up, and actually using that as like a differentiator from other people, like other designers in my case, and using that to your advantage. So for me, I think is the biggest thing is like what I mentioned, yung pagkamalasakit, which I think doesn't really come naturally to a lot of, maybe I'm generalizing, but a lot of people who grew up here.
Did you feel like
No, I think it's more that that's not the first thing that comes to mind for people. So I think in my for the parking sign, for example, that was my own personal endeavor, and that came from a very, I don't know. For me, I am personally very pained just observing people's everyday frustrations, and I think that comes from being raised in a different culture where people are very empathetic naturally, and you're kind of raised to be very empathetic, but then also kind of having the American influence of like, I don't know, it's like putting things into like action and kind of combining those different cultures into, a project that kind of changes people's everyday lives.
explain to a lot of people what you exactly do? I think our audience here, you can explain to them later on, because it's very interesting, especially for the younger ones, to hear about your career. Yeah. So how about Connie? I can really feel how emotional you were getting earlier, but I am really moved that your father worked here, and I'm sure that's why you were telling us it is a very special moment for you tonight.
Yeah, it was, and when I heard about this event and got the letter, really had to sit with it, because I'm still grieving. My father just passed, in October, and so I had to sit with that. But at the same time, I knew and I don't really talk about it. I don't talk about. I think maybe the person I've known here the longest is probably Vice Consul Armin, but I would never even mention that to him. I just don't. Your question about challenges, I think I can't say what is the biggest challenge, because that would discount every single challenge that I have experienced, right? And I think that maybe it's me, maybe it's not, but every single turn of my life is challenging, because I navigate so many different identities, right? There's an ongoing joke in my law firm that they call me the trifecta, right? Because I'm female, I'm Asian, and I'm gay. So I'm the perfect poster child. Kulang na lang yung disability, di ba? Kasi,
Wag naman.
yeah, pero parang perfect child for diversity, inclusion, and and equality. But I struggle with that too, because I don't want to be recognized for who I am, because of these labels, or because it's a time when it is okay to live with these labels, but you want to be recognized for other things, for your skill, your compassion, right? The values you hold, your integrity. I mean, these are the things I'd like to be known as. And when I deal with my clients, I'd like for them to think she's my lawyer because she serves me well. Right, not because of all these other labels, right? That's it. But so how do you overcome challenges? It comes back to your values, I think. And Myrish mentioned that. It's really, I don't always like sound religious, and people get shocked that I have this side of me.
Mm-hmm.
But I am deeply religious, and what I mean by that, very deeply spiritual. And that's my anchor, right? And that's my anchor. I think it's cultural. I was raised Catholic. I went to a Catholic school, and I continue to live with those values. But at the same time, it's also resilience. That's the grit that New York taught me, right? You got to be resilient. So yeah, so it's almost like, how do you survive and thrive? You got to balance the sacred and the secular, right? The sacred and the profane in a way. But yeah, you got to live in that. Exactly. It's a balancing act.
But did you ever feel like what your father told you before, like everything was happening, did you ever feel like he is very right?
No, I always clashed with him. So the moment he said that, I said, "Oh, I'm exactly doing what I want to do."
You proved him wrong.
I love to do that, but now in retrospect, he said that because he wanted to spare me. He wanted to spare the pain. He already saw my struggles. He didn't want me to keep going through them. But I think in the end, I'd like to think my father also recognized that by going through those struggles, I was in a better position to take care of him in his old age, in his dying day, that I was strong enough for him to say, "Doc, let her decide. Let my daughter decide. Let her speak for me." Because he knew that I could. He knew that I got the strength going through what I went through.
I think as a father, I think it's very natural for him to protect you.
Yes, yeah.
Just some form of guidance.
Yes, of course.
But we're happy that you were so stubborn to go against your father, and you're here
And
tonight.
that's not the message to the youth here.
Of course, of course. They might be watching on Facebook.
Right. It's not so much to be stubborn, but to be strong in your convictions, but also like learn how to listen, right? Because you can get lost in your head,
Yes.
right? And when you do, then you're lost. So you need to have an open mind and an open heart, and I that's what I'd like to teach. My niece is here. And I hope I'm sure when I speak to her, I hope that comes through. So.
I think I already made mention of probably the biggest challenge in my life, so perhaps I can move to in my professional capacity perhaps. And I will say, I agree with Connie, it's hard to pinpoint a biggest challenge for us women in that arena, but I will bring forth probably two spectrums. One, an experience in the Philippines that I know still permeates the United States, especially for those who are out there serving in the public, and I mean representation. Because when I was elected as city councilor back in 2000, I was the only female and the youngest among the elected public officials in my city. And boy, oh boy, it is not a perfect experience. Well, there's no perfect experience. It's not an ideal entrance into the world of politics indeed. It was so challenging that I remember being schooled with not only the experience itself, but also how to actually be in a room that is predominantly male dominated. And it was challenging not just because it was male dominated, but because it was really their world. Many of them were seasoned politicians, and for one reason or another, there is this perception that when you're young and female, you probably are a little bit less competent than them. So every single week I would go, and any initiative I would propose was literally struck down. Democracy is a game of numbers. I was a minority city councilor. I learned how to actually use the podium to speak and to use my voice. But I also learned the power of compromise to a point where I felt it became an old boys club. So I was very confused of what my mission as a public servant became. And I know across the world, even in the United States, female representation, both in local government and even in national government, remains a barrier. Coming to the United States as a mid-career professional was also really pretty challenging. And I cannot describe in words what that meant. When I was lucky to have a professor who took interest in what I can do and gave the opportunity to me after going through the process of hiring in the United States. And I will say I started from the bottom. I started as program manager. I learned to appreciate what it means to observe more before even coming forward. And if I think about probably the bigger challenge of what the first 2 years of my work experience at the Kennedy School was, I would say walking this tightrope balance of modesty and showing your competence. Because in the Philippines, we never talk about our accomplishments, right? We let our work speak for itself. And I was sort of trying to experiment what that will look like from the US context, and seemingly really embarrassed to even talk about it, right? The norm of the day is networking and probably self-marketing to an extent. I will be candid to say that meritocracy and competence is still, the currency here. Humility, actually, in a little bit of an irony I will share, but this is my lived experience, still plays a major role in certain communities where we live. It's a struggle, but working hard and showing what we can do, I guess it's almost a combination of that and luck to have bosses who actually know how to identify talent and open the pathways for you. So your second question becomes, how did I surmount both challenges? Well, in public life, there is just so much to do. You wake up every day. There are so many issues. There will always be a need for good leaders. And so I wake up every day with that fear that, there is work to be done. As far as the challenges in my previous work was concerned, for me it was paying forward. For whatever good was given my family, whatever challenge was given me, it was just nothing, it all paled in comparison to what was given me. So the fervor becomes the paying forward in whatever little way I could, so I could also provide a pathway for others. Thank you.
Coming from, can you hear me? Okay, coming from the best trait of a woman that leads
For me, it's empathy. It's the ability to listen and not just listen to the words, to listen to even those that's not being spoken. Because we talk about, power struggles, right? And you can tell that even those in power are not comfortable, right? And some just don't really know what to do with it. Some are, it's the way they think that's how they should behave. Or sometimes there's implicit pressure not to act a certain way on their part. But with empathy and with your willingness, when you talk about humility, it also involves giving yourself the chance to recognize maybe you're wrong about what they think. Because I think in empathy, that's how you build a connection with the other person, and that's how you overcome prejudices or certain notions about who you are. And from empathy, you work towards, the common goal, right? And for me, that for me is, I think, if you call it like, what's your superpower? That's one of my superpowers. It's empathy.
Yeah, I think empathy and very closely related is wanting to help people. I That's kind of like an obsession of mine, so I like doing that to a fault. um, I think in the particular work that I've done, I think that has was the reason that I approached it in like the opposite way of what I think how other people would approach it. So with the parking sign work, I think a lot of people would expect others who would do the same kind of project to go straight to city government and kind of like bang on, knock on the doors and bang on, call the officials in charge. But the way I thought about it was actually, well, who do the officials listen to? Like, if they were to accept anything or want to change anything about their city, I think that they would actually want to know before they roll that out whether their constituents, whether it works for their city and their constituents. And so I thought, oh, I have this idea, why don't I find out whether it actually makes sense to everyday people, everyday drivers. And so I kind of started from the bottom. So it was a very grassroots kind of approach, which is brought about by kind of like empathy for people's everyday experiences. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I, I think it's also been named as the most important leadership skill, especially during these challenging times. But I agree with them. Empathy is very strong among women. I will just add this combination of resilience and hard work. Just because all our lives we are always expected to work twice as hard as the other gender, right? As male. So I think there is almost this automatic default among women of, rising above to that expectation without having been told. And I think even in the homes, I will say mothers, including myself, we're the last to sleep. We sort of survey the home. Is that already done? You stay up at night, and when there is any assignment given you, you always want to do your best because you are just used to it. There's one more ladder, one more step to take, one more ceiling to break all the time.
natural for women to be hardworking. That's very true. I agree with you. I think you both agree with us too.
Well, I think I'm the oldest in this group.
No, you're the
So-
youngest in this room.
So I gotta tell you guys, I'm tired. you know, all those.
Generalizing. Let me.
I think hard work is like overrated, frankly.
We also
Especially-
need to acknowledge that
I'm-
we get tired.
especially with the pandemic. I'm not going to say that I'm for free pass. And I think people who work with me know that. And yes, I'm not, I would probably be ranked among, if someone were to ask, who are the hardworking people in this room, or or who are the hardworking lawyers in your team, I'm sure my name will be one of those. But I really think it is overrated, because I am now all for balance, folks. We need to live
We
like
need to
balanced
rest.
lives.
We need rest. Yes, I also acknowledge that we all need rest.
I mean, this pandemic has taught that, hasn't it?
That's true.
Right? I mean, how many of you has like woken up in the middle of this pandemic and said, why did I work so hard for?
Right, and this pandemic happened, and we're all like, so what's all the hard work for?
True, right? I mean, so there is, and we all know this, I think personally, and also you've read it, like there's a lot of movement,
Yes.
right now, between jobs, people
That's
moving
true.
around, people quitting. There's a whole great, resignation among like the workforce. Like people are quitting their jobs. Many a time I've heard, I know people who's just like, left New York and moved somewhere else and not sure, don't care if like they're still gonna work or not, right, remote or otherwise. Because I think what this pandemic has done is really altered the way we view the way we work, right?
Yes.
So I'm just putting it out there.
That is very true, that yes, we do have to work very hard, but at the same time, we have to also enjoy our life. Life is short. Someday, we'll be meeting our creator, and we have to enjoy life as well, right? But I want to know, given this empathy, all the traits of women, of being Filipino, did you ever feel like, up to this day, there's still huge bias against?
Every single day. Connie ended her speech by, there is work to be done.
This is a huge work to be done.
Yeah, I think, I think we cannot oversimplify where the bias lies. It's multifaceted. It's a very nuanced topic to talk about, but I think to deny its existence would probably be denying ourselves things that we see from our very eyes. So yes, I would say for sure every single day. From the moment you walk down the street, you take the metro, you come to work, you talk to other people. There is so much work that needs to be done.
You can't ignore bias, right? You need to be aware of it, and you need to know how to deal with it. You talk about just walking down the street, and we know Asian American violence is so real in our community, not just not just the Filipino community, but the Asian American community. Every single day, we hear of stories. I have not taken the subway in a long time, and I used to take the subway at 2 in the morning, no problem, and now I don't. I haven't. So that's just on a practical level, but on a professional level, yes, it is there. I think bias is there. It's always there, but you need to identify it, and you need to come to terms with it, because that's the way you can navigate it, right? And you have to also, and you'll know what the sources of the bias are, and you need to work your way so that those sources, it's almost like cutting down roots. You're cutting down roots. You don't do it all in one fall sweep, right? But you work at it incrementally.
incrementally?
I think for me, I think I actually struggle with like where the bias comes from. On one hand, is it about you being a minority and a woman, or is it about kind of like how you carry yourself? And I feel like those are very interrelated and are hard to like pull apart, because then you can also have men who have those qualities who also feel that bias, who may be more soft-spoken and that kind of thing. So I think there's like a web of several factors there. But yeah, I remember a friend of mine mentioned that she works at a venture capital firm, and she had a higher position, and she had an intern who was a white male. And whenever there would be people who would pitch, they would always address the man and never her. So she would always have to tell the person, you know, kind of like correct the person to say that she was the one kind of leading the panel. But yeah, so I'm sure there is bias, and there are a lot of kind of factors that go into that. And it's also, I think, like a vicious cycle, right? Of like, you're a certain way or you act a certain way, and then so that you get treated a certain way, which kind of makes you even more whatever, you know, what qualities you have. Yeah, and so it's about, I don't know, I guess for me, kind of how do you be fully yourself and confident, no matter what that is? It doesn't mean you have to become like this super aggressive person. And that's, I think, what I've kind of where I am right now in terms of how to combat that.
Well, you can't talk about bias also without talking about implicit bias, right? You need to be aware of your own biases, because it's not one way. It also comes from you.
That is true.
Yeah, and I want to add, perhaps because we all come from very different lived experiences, right, different backgrounds, and where we come from also influences the way we think, what we say, the way we deal with others and our environment. So I think unless I guess where we come from also educates us, meaning that education on implicit biases and, you know, treating people equally and with equity, you know, non-discrimination, unless it starts in the home and perhaps even at a younger age, it will be too late to like educate us at 47 and whatever. And,
She wants to hear it.
and you know, Connie says incremental, right? Because I also feel that in any issue whatsoever, the first step to solving, you know, any matter before us is to actually admit that there is a broken system, that there is a problem, and that we are part of it. If we deny being part of the bias of that, you know, vicious cycle, as you say, we will never reach that point that we want to. So, yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. It's really primarily us coming from very different backgrounds, and perhaps to offer, Connie is the expert here, but I learned cross-cultural humility as an integral value, especially in a hyper-globalized world.
That is very true. Do you think the quality of us being Filipino women with empathy could probably help solve it? I mean, you said it has to start from home. You said it's not just bias. There's implicit bias. And you said that you experience it every day, or I mean, even your friends. So do you think somehow it could be a start of the incremental process? Because what does it really make Filipino women unique? Because you are leaders now. We look up to you. You inspire us. And I think from here on, we're going to take it after you. And we just want to hear from you if you think that it could be something that could help solve or incrementally solve what is going on now. I know it's much, much bigger than just one community, one minority, but could be a unique perspective from the Filipino community?
I can begin just really quickly to say, one, I think empathy definitely helps in seeing it from the side of the other, being in the shoes of the person you're dealing with. But I hesitate to, I think it's a bit unfair to put the burden only on Filipino women or
course.
women in general. I think that it takes all of us, right? And then second, I'm more for say something when you see something. So it's a combination of, an internal self-awareness of what you can do yourself, but also a collective action. So prevention plus prosecution, both should go hand in hand, because if we are just empathetic and it is not called out, we will also really not reach where we want to go.
I
Can't add
I
anymore.
can't add any more to that. You already you said that.
Well, earlier, because I want to be able to find out how we as a community, collectively, as you said, not just I know it's a collective effort, not just from our community, our minority group, but how can the Filipino community contribute to creating a solution, and how unique could Filipinos be? I mean, you talked about identity. What do you think could be the Filipino American identity? Because I remember last night we were talking. We had a small talk last night, so we can get to know each other a little bit before today. And you talk about identity, but it came to my mind after our talk that, yeah, what is the Filipino American identity? And we are here in America, and I think it's, as I know that you have to persecute, but of course it has to start from all of us, and for them to feel any change, I think every one of us should do something. So how can we uniquely contribute as Filipino Americans? Because I want to be able to discuss how we can empower each other and the whole community.
Well, I'm part of. I think you start where you're located, right? In like for me, that is with being a lawyer, and with the other Filipino American lawyers in this country. And I think when you say Filipino American identity, I think it's a blending, right, of the Filipino values, the Filipino culture, as well as being American, right? And it's maybe a combination of the best of both, or sometimes the best of one and the worst of the other. I mean, but I think the root of it all is like when, especially, and my, as I said, my peer groups here, and they're all members of the Filipino American Lawyers Association of New York. We are very mindful of being known, not just as lawyers or as Asian lawyers, but because there's so many different kinds of Asian, right? The National Asian Pacific American Bar Association has probably 4,000, 5,000 members. And actually, Anna Mercado Clark, who's a member of the board of NAPABA, is here. And Filipinos are, what, less than 1%, less than 2% of lawyers in the US. So we strive and we make a conscious effort to support each other, to get together. We have formed the National Filipino American Lawyers Association. And what we do is we become not just a support group for each other, but also we gather together and work with other Filipino associations, communities, the Philippine Consulate here in New York and in other states, and with the Philippine government for causes that empower and enrich and are vital to Filipinos in the United States. So that's our immediate reality, and that's what we're working for.
With Nicole, coming from your perspective with your career being innovative designer, how do you get to?
This is coming a little bit differently, but one thing that came to mind as I was listening to you was actually when I had started doing consulting. So I'm in a 9 to 5 now, but I consulted for a couple of years, and it was, I think my main challenge there was negotiation, like negotiating for projects, right? And that was something that I had to learn. And what was hard for me is it was coming from a place where I'm like feeling the perspective of the other person. It was like very hard for me to just like fight for myself. And it was like very uncomfortable for me to be in these high stakes kind of uncomfortable situations. And advice to kind of just be more aggressive never really worked for me. And one of my friends actually framed it in a very interesting way, which I think other people with similar personalities would find helpful, which is that, okay, you are a designer with certain accomplishments already, so you need to actually ask for what you're worth, because you're not just fighting for yourself. Like, how much will the other person who doesn't have as much experience as you get paid? So thinking at it through that lens of like fighting for yourself, you're actually fighting or like raising the bar for everyone else.
That is a very good perspective. I'm learning a lot tonight. Definitely learning a lot tonight. Myrish, what do you think?
So a few things come to mind. I think I mentioned it previously, there's an individual and a collective aspect to what we can do, right? I think we've talked a lot about empathy, but I think empathy also, I say kicks in when there is deep listening. So I think we are such a minority. You talk about Filipino Americans or even Asian Americans as a collective. We still are a minority in this country. I feel that from an individual basis, if we commit ourselves to, in every conversation, to ask how are we trying to represent or be felt in that conversation, committing to deeper listening, to even educating, not necessarily to educating from our perspective, but through education, but educating through listening, so they are able to feel who we are from that perspective. And then I wondered too if we can also educate by committing to creating safe spaces whenever we are in conversation. Collectively, I feel that we can have conversations such as this with the other in the room, right? Cross-cultural conversations, which could be telling stories that is unique in our culture without having to put the issue front and center, right? I think people always love narratives. And then second, I think education, for whatever it's worth, it should be part of primary, elementary education, if you will. So navigating the advocacy in the space of public education would be significant. Probably not all of us can do that, but there would be persons. And then, I recognize what Connie has said. In our spaces, because really, the solution of any issue is contextualized to our own sphere of influence, right? Sharon Cuneta ba was the one who said, pasan natin ang mundo. I always remember that. Ang daigdig ba? Or something like that. But I think, it can only be a collective if we all put in our best efforts. And, we can have those spheres of influence in our communities and operate from there.
One thing though, when you talk about identity, the Filipino-American identity is really, it's not uniform, right? And I think being a Filipino immigrant, as opposed to being born here and raised here, really with Filipino-American from the start, right? I'm just a naturalized American, right? And I do now identify as Filipino-American because sometimes it shocks me that I've lived here a lot longer than I thought that I've lived in the Philippines. But we need to be aware of that there is a distinction between Filipino history and Filipino American history. That's very much a part of, you know, the Asian American history in this country. We don't really talk about that, right? I mean, who knew about the massacre of Filipinos in California back in like the early 1900s? Or the Filipino alasqueros, right? And these are the salmon workers in Seattle, like all the way back in the 1800s. Did you know that the very first like Asians in this country are not even the Chinese, but the Louisiana fishermen, like out in, you know, that there's a settlement out there, that there are 4 or 5 generations of Filipinos, okay, in Louisiana. Who knew that? There's actually a historical settlement out there. You know, this is the stuff we need to be talking about, because you can't just say you're Filipino American and think it's the Philippines. There is a history in this country that is written by Filipinos all the way back in the, you know, 16, 17, 1800s.
So education really is critical. History, empathically listening to others, cross-cultural conversations, which would lead to empathic listening and knowledge of each other, right? History. What could be your message to like the Filipino Americans listening about how these things could empower us as Filipinos in not, I don't want to just talk about Filipino Americans because we are on Facebook Live. There could be Filipinos in other countries. We are very global now. You can see Filipinos everywhere. You can meet Filipinos in Australia, in Japan. So what will you tell them if you get to talk to them, speak to them through Facebook Live right now? How can they empower themselves and be uniquely Filipino and stay on course towards carving their own path for themselves? Especially women, since we're celebrating Women's Month.
One of the things that's remarkable that I've learned is that we all find each other, right? Wherever we are.
That is very true.
Right?
Too.
It's you know, you're walking down in Paris, and there's a Filipino who would call out, "Huy!"
You spot them with hoy.
You know, and you're like, Pinoy, right? And that's also true. Like, you go to Spain, and we are a diaspora, right? And I think this is also really part of the OFW experience, right? So I think we all find each other. And when we do, we form a community. And that's where pagmamalasakit, pagtutulungan, you know, that's very Filipino.
Bayanihan.
Well,
Together, one community.
okay. All right. But what I'm saying is that I am confident because it is the truth. It has held every single one of us here. We do find each other. And when we do, I think it's really important we don't compete with each other.
Yes.
Right? That's the one thing we could leave behind in the old country. And really come from, we're in this together. How can I help you? Because we make our own families. There's the families we're born into, but as we're thrust into the world, we create our own families. That's not always just who you marry, right? It's the roommates that you find. It's your friends. It's your colleagues. So for me, how do we empower each other? Is that we come together, we help each other.
Myra.
You know, a month ago, I worked with fellows who are CEOs from Africa, and one of them came to me and said, "Can I kindly have a conversation with you, because I'm very interested in knowing why is the Filipino so hardworking, and you take so much pride in." I know Connie doesn't like hard work for today, but he did say this to me.
Balance. I said balance.
There's nothing wrong with hard work. You need to like put it in context. But this is a true story. And he said, I really admire, you know, Filipinos in the diaspora. He's from Nigeria. And I would like to bring that good trait back to my country so I can also empower my own people. His predicament became that we are such a proud people that, you know, we value probably the gold that you see externally rather than working and position is important to us. Anyway, it got me thinking, yeah, I mean, us Filipinos, we take so much pride in being Filipino, but we sometimes do not show it to each other. So in addition to what Connie has said, I think her theme also rung very closely to unity. I will add, let's build our narrative together. Because we tell stories, but they are very different stories depending on the people that we talk to, and even when we talk amongst ourselves. So let's build that narrative together and be the Philippines that we want to become, either when we go back home or across the diaspora.
That is beautiful. Nicole, you want to add something else?
I think for me, I mentioned it earlier that it is typical, I feel, for Filipinos to come from a mix of cultures. And so I think it's about really knowing who you are and being observant in the world and in yourself, and having self-awareness to see what is the unique perspective that you bring, and figuring out how to leverage that to become strengths, to use them as strengths. And then once you get to whatever position that you need to be to help others, you know, come up as well. There's a quote, I think it's by Toni Morrison, but it goes like, life is not a grab bag candy game. That once you are free, it is your job to set others free.
Wow. Beautiful. So coming from all these women who have excelled in their respective fields, I have learned tonight that we as Filipino women are very empathic, and it's something that we can use to unite our community and come around together and probably not necessarily fight what is happening today, but unite us as Filipinos, as Filipino American, and learn from each other, empathically listen to each other, and get to know more about other cultures as well. And these things will help us to continually slowly change the way things are right now. And with that, I want to open the floor for any questions from the audience. That this is a Q&A portion. This is the test. Yes, ma'am. Can I hand the mic to ma'am? I'll just give mine. I'll go down. Please.
So I think occasions like these are incredible in putting a spotlight on accomplishments of women, and in particular Filipino women. So where I live and where I work, I don't have much exposure to Filipinos. You know, like you, oftentimes I'll find myself at a seat at a table full of predominantly men. Actually, I work in finance. So this is important for this particular constituency, but also the younger generation. So I think it's important for settings like this to persist. And the question that I'd like to pose is, in your particular position, what opportunities or advocacy work do you do to unlock more leadership positions for women, and in particular Filipinos?
Thank you so much. I didn't get your name. What's your name?
Rowena Rothman.
No. Thank you, Arena. So Can, maybe Mayush can start since
Yeah, I can
this is
begin.
your group.
I mean, both as connector, not both, connector, advocate, and sponsor. So in where I am positioned in the community that I am in, building a network is integral to strengthening our community. So I have played a role of connecting people, even non-Filipinos, right, to the networks that I have built. And then sponsoring others, making known opportunities for not only promotions in leadership, but openings in leadership positions where it may not be known. And then training. Whatever I do in my work every day, I also pan out in our community. The third one is, yeah, building a network. I said advocacy already. I think it's important to actually vouch for our fellow Filipinos, because this is a community, and I'm learning this. I'm still a work in progress as far as the United States is concerned. But while I say meritocracy is still the currency here, so actually is your network and the relationships that you build. And oftentimes, opportunities are only opened if there is someone who vouches for someone. And I think it's important that we do that for others. For me, it's a way to pay forward, but it's actually also, you know, just I think a natural thing to do as far as our community is concerned.
Yeah, so my spin on that would be mentorship, allies, and pipeline, right? So in my leadership positions with both mainstream organizations, for example, the National Association of Women Lawyers, which is the oldest bar association for female attorneys in the U.S. I'm the first Filipino American on that board, and I make it a point that every time there is a chance for nominating people on a committee, so for example, NOL, that's the acronym for the National Association of Women Lawyers, they have a Supreme Court committee. So that means that every time a nominee to the United States Supreme Court it happens, we form a committee, and that's composed of about 30 to 40 different women from all, and it's a chance to work with women lawyers all over the country in vetting and researching this potential nominee, because we eventually issue a statement. And I make it a point to nominate Filipino American lawyers I know to be included in that. Every time that there's also a leadership position that opens in other bar organizations that I'm part of, I always make sure I promote Filipino American lawyers that I know of. That's first. I also nominate non-Filipino American lawyers. But yes, that is my personal bias. I have to say that because we are so few and far between that it's really important to support each other. And I'm not ashamed of that. So long as I also open doors for others. So that's what I personally do.
Nicole, do you think in your field, in your career, do you think you are opening doors to younger generations? Because we were talking about earlier that it's your job is very different from what we know. It's unusual in the Philippines to be a designer, a user experience designer. And I don't think a lot of people from the Philippines have heard of this. And we were talking about opportunities and access to all these options.
Yeah. I think for me, it's very close to mentorship, like Connie had mentioned. And so what I personally do is I'm very generous with my time in terms of people who email me and ask, for just kind of to share my story and how I got to where I am. And, sometimes they have their own ideas for, their own independent projects. And so I'm just very generous with my time in terms of talking to those people. But also, I think there's a certain, I think it's also with those people that I speak to, introducing a certain kind of questioning what things are today, which I think I find actually back home there's a lot of, because of the situation, I feel it's just a lot harder to, there's a learned helplessness sometimes, right? And so I think some of the stories I'm able to tell are able to get them to, I don't know, like think outside of that and think that there's another way that things can be.
There's another whole world out there.
Yeah, yeah.
And a whole set of opportunities and options for all of them. And I think all of you are showing that to everyone, that like you, Myrish, even mid-career, you can take another path, you know, with Connie, that even if a lot of people around you says otherwise that you can make it, or this is a very dangerous path you're taking, you can prove them wrong. And with you, it's carving out a path that is unfamiliar to our community.
Yeah. Just introducing an idea of I hate the phrase of ganun talaga, or that's just the way things are, and just kind of introducing a different way of thinking of things.
I wanted to add two more very briefly, because you mentioned young people, and this is probably not so directly related to leadership, but part of what we do in our work is also recruitment, access, and opportunity, to demystify this entire idea that it's, well, it's true, it's very hard to get to, especially the elite schools in the US, but it can be done. And we have actually several from Manila who come from very modest backgrounds, and who have come all the way to, the elite schools in the United States. And so part of our work is to let that be known. And also, second, that it is possible to come and be able to afford elite education here, because financial aid is actually really groundbreaking. And then second, this culture of giving back, which actually is naturally very Filipino, but probably not for everyone. And so young people today, I see are very much grounded more and more, but to create that culture also, I think, implicitly builds leadership.
I hope we got to. Thank you. There's another question coming from. Okay. This is exercise for me. Come on.
Thank you very much. My question this evening pertains to courage and leadership. I was listening to a podcast recently by Brene Brown, and the context of her message is that leadership is great. There's all these lessons you hear, but it takes the courage to actually take that lesson and make it real. So what would you suggest for the young people who are just starting out in their careers, or somebody like me who's mid-career, but my thing is that I was taught to be quiet unless spoken to. So how do you then take that initiative to be courageous and say what's on your mind, be heard, and take that next step? Because that's how you get to where you folks are at, being at the table and having a voice.
That is a very powerful question. I give the floor to you, amazing women. Myrish.
I can begin by saying, this has been said over and over, but I think the most recent prominent figure who said it was Maria Ressa. They say you will not have succeeded unless you have failed. So I think to embrace the fact that every step you take that's a success also comes with it multiple failures, right? You can never know how far you can go unless you try. That takes courage, actually. And then second, voice, the use of voice, I will say I'm also still a work in progress in that regard. I think it is tied very much directly with knowing self and knowing your sphere of influence and knowing your strengths as well as your weaknesses. I tend to shy away from conversations where I have nothing to say. For me, listening is as important as speaking. And there are just those venues where you can just take in and you can be the sponge in the room and then use that conversation you're learning to then be a speaker in another venue. The other last piece is I think it's important to choose our words well, because the moment it comes out of our mouths, it can actually significantly make or break another person's life. It can influence, it can also hurt someone, and, and be the cause for some unfortunate trauma. So I will say it is more nuanced than what it seems. And as I said, I'm a work in progress. Every day is an experience, and it is important to understand who are in the room, who is in the audience, and what type of message are you wanting to deliver in the conversation.
Connie, we need some courage.
See, it's your question is really in the legal profession anyway. We call it like the phenomena of the quiet Asian. Okay, because culturally speaking, and Asians in general are quiet compared to the non-Asians. And as a lawyer, that's difficult because as a lawyer, you need to speak, right? So, and being quiet is I certainly went through that. Some people may not believe me, especially my family, but but in a news setting, in a work setting, it is quite intimidating to be sometimes the only Asian or the only Filipina if there are other Asians, right? So then how can your voice be heard? And that is really more of a personal issue, but at the same time, it's also cultural. So what we have done, and I have to keep referring to work I've done with other lawyers because we recognize this. So the Asian American Bar Association of New York has held workshops on how to overcome like that being quiet, the tendency to be quiet. So it starts even in law school when students are interviewing for their jobs. It's a special skill. You don't just go and interview cold. It's traumatic, okay? And it could be traumatic unless you're gifted, you're natural at it. So there are workshops where experienced lawyers sit down with the younger lawyers, and we go through the ropes of the Q&A, sometimes single person, sometimes a group, okay? And in my law firm, what I personally do is I give opportunities, okay, to the younger lawyers, the opportunity for them to speak. So if I'm in a meeting, what do you think? All right, because I feel it's my responsibility to bring them out now that I am in a position of being able to control the conversation. So controlling the conversation doesn't mean it's you speaking, right? You let other people speak. So I make it a point to ask people, what do you think? How can we hear from you? Like, you've been sitting quietly there. Or I say, okay, you're going to take this deposition, and they get shocked. All right, how long? You have 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I'll help you prepare this, but you're going to take it. And this is how they gain the confidence. Or you're going to appear in court, and you're going to speak to the judge. Or I want you to handle this conference even by phone, right? So that is, and I'll tell you, I think Zoom is a beautiful thing because you're on video, right? And for the shyer people, it's easier to speak because you're not really in person. I mean, that's the feedback I've gotten anyway. It's easier. So,
How about you, Nicole?
So I think for me, one is speaking authentically to your experience, but also you can figure out how to be a leader like in an established space, but you can also carve out your own space, which is what I feel like I've tried to do, especially if your approach is very unique, and kind of within that space, be fully yourself. And so, I think that's just like a different way to approach it, is to like create your own game.
Yes, that's a different perspective. I think a lot of young people could relate to that, but they have this hunger to create their own path nowadays. Did the panel answer your? Okay. Is there any other question or feedback? Yes.
Um, I have maybe at least two questions. The first one is, I know for a fact that there's a lot of effort being done to really embolden women to become leaders. But however, you can see the pervasiveness of male leaders even in the United States, and you look at the disproportionality of female and male leaders. What do you think is keeping women from having these positions, even in the financial, I think, institution, there are more males than female leaders. Even in the field of STEM, there's still a struggle. And even with the Me Too movement, we do make, successes, but it looks like we go back to the playing, drawing board. Do you think these efforts that we have to make to empower women is sustainable? Do you think there will come a time that we do not need to celebrate National Women's Month? Because do we really have a National Men's Month? So I think that is a question that may be crazy, but I'm a teacher. Those questions are given to me by my students if I talk about National Women's Month. So what do you think is something? Is it cultural? And I know for a fact there's never been a female U.S. president in the United States. So what do you think could be one of the main reasons why there is still a pervasiveness of male leaders in this country?
I think this is a very challenging question for everybody. This is, I think, beyond our community, but I think our panel will be happy to give some insight to that question.
I'm actually curious. I'm curious. This is my follow-up question.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
curious because you came here mid-career. What the differences you see in the leadership between back home and here? Because I remember, I think there was a survey that I saw where in the Philippines there's about 45% women CEOs, people in the C-suite, compared to here, which is a very big disparity. And so I feel like Philippine culture is very, I think there's a general, I think women hold a lot of positions of power in the Philippines. So I'm curious, kind of.
Well, it's a complex question altogether. I will just speak to what I know and my own experience. So there is data. So let's talk about the Philippines being actually a matriarchal society. In many respects, women have a voice, right? In many of the communities where we serve, we are the predominant voice. Many men, even Filipino men, joke about us being the Speaker of the House anyhow. Not related to the question. But in terms of representation, there is data that says that the barriers for women as far as leadership in, let us say, elective office is concerned, the major barrier are actually resources. Just because it is a money game, right? You need resources to campaign. You need resources altogether to even run for public office. What does that mean to market yourself, to put yourself out there? The second one is the barrier of actually choosing family, which is a Filipino trait altogether, but more probably seriously taken as a concern by women before they embark on public office. I will say these two are also predominant in the United States. It is, I think, a wider barrier here than it is in the Philippines, you are right. So far, the countries where a female representation has been successful are those that have what you call the quota system. Rwanda is at the top, Denmark, all those. In countries where the barrier is so wide, the quota system has been a very effective first step for women representation to increase. Now, as far as the C-suite is concerned, I think that female representation in politics is probably doing a better job than female CEOs. I know for sure, oh no, not for sure, but I think as far as C-suite is concerned in the United States, it seems like less than 1% of CEOs are female. And I think that is totally a very nuanced, the factors that contribute to that are totally nuanced altogether. It is both cultural, it is both racial. I mean, we can see it from multiple angles. As to your question of, will we reach a point in our lives where we do not need to celebrate International Women's Day in order to recognize women? I hope so. I think that is the aspiration, right? But until and unless that happens, we will really need, I know some people probably think that affirmative action is not the way to go, but in instances where the gap still exists, it is necessary to put the important matter front and center. So that's just what I will probably say to you. To your question, in my experience, in terms of politics, I actually think that in certain communities in the United States, women representation are catching up. And I would like to sincerely recognize Boston, that just elected our first woman of color mayor, Michelle, and Cambridge. You know, the twin cities of Cambridge and Boston both have mayors who are women of color. So I think there is a slow shift in terms of women representation, but across the globe and even the United States, a lot of work still needs to be done.
Anything to add from the other panel? Very well said, Myrish. Okay, well, for me, I think I would always love to celebrate women. It may be March or any day of the year. I think we deserve to be celebrated. These amazing women deserve to be celebrated, not just because of their success in their respective fields, but what I have seen from talking to you tonight is that you have been paying forward all the success that you are reaching in at this stage of your life and your careers. You are giving it back to the community, and that is very beautiful. That is very, very matriarchal, like you said. That's why we are.
Okay, I think we're about to wrap up, but we
Yes.
have a request. LJ, we have not had the chance to get to know you, so we would like to give you the floor to also introduce yourself. You are distinguished and admired yourself, right?
I think we don't have time anymore. We are running out of time. Consul Jen is sleepy at this moment. No,
Okay, I just have one question.
yes.
What makes you get up in the morning? What drives you?
Well, for me, it's actually my children. I have 2 kids. One is 11 and one is 3. And they are the reason why I always strive for another day, strive for success. But I am also a very faithful and religious woman. And the engine that makes everything work is actually God for me. He orchestrates everything. And that's what makes me get up in the morning every single day. Thank you, thank you. Whew, my gosh, it feels like a beauty pageant. Now I know how you feel earlier. Thank you so much to our audience and to everybody who's watching on Facebook Live. Sorry for keeping you for a very long time, but it has been a very beautiful discussion here with our panelists.
Maraming salamat po to our honorees and our MC, Attorney Antonio, Attorney Montoya, Ms. Elianteng, and Ms. Reyes. It has been a very engaging discussion. I'm sure everyone here have been energized to put the Filipino woman to the forefront. Marami pong salamat. And if you would care to indulge us further, remember we mentioned earlier that we have an honoree who failed to show up because of an urgent matter she had to address. She, however, sent us a very brief video presentation, and I hope that everyone here could stay for that short message of hers. I'll be giving a short profile of our last honoree before we play the video. She has worked her way from a college internship at The Source to being a senior vice president of artists and repertoire, or A&R, at Def Jam, starting a producer-driver record label with 6-time Grammy winner Mike Dean. In the process, she's been named one of Billboard's top female music executives and developed some of the biggest artists of the 21st century. She was instrumental in the resurrection of the once dormant Epic Records, signing generational stars like Future and Travis Scott, and overseeing A&R operations as it became a hip-hop powerhouse. Her relationship with Travis Scott led to a connection with legendary producer Mike Dean, who she now manages. She stresses the importance of loyalty to artists and finding musicians who have a clear vision of what they want to become. She also says there's no way to shortcut the developmental process and that she didn't get into the industry to turn a quick profit off the latest trend. While working at Def Jam, she worked closely with a wide array of talent, developing charismatic newcomers Fredo Bang, Cash Page, Ilham, and Danilea, and even helping Kanye West put together the rollout for Jesus is King and Donda. Now with her new company, MWA, she will continue to nurture young talent. The daughter of Filipino immigrants, she had to constantly think outside the box to find her place in the industry and was often one of the very few women in label meetings. She's made it a priority to build a diverse team and to empower female A&Rs however she can. Ms. Marisa Pizarro, who will now be speaking to us through her recorded message. After Ms. Pizarro's presentation, we will be calling Consul General on stage to give the plaques and our tokens to our panelists and our moderator.
I am so sorry I'm not with you in person. I had trouble with my childcare. I'm sure some of you could relate. I did want to drop a line and thank the Philippine Consulate General for honoring me as a distinguished Filipino this year. Thank you. This is such an honor. I wish I was there. Hi everyone, I'm Marisa Pizarro. I am so sorry I'm not with you in person. I had trouble with my childcare. I'm sure some of you could relate. I did want to drop a line and thank the Philippine Consulate General for honoring me as a distinguished Filipino this year.
Difficulties, Conjen
Thank
Pato,
you.
but rest
This is such
assured,
an honor. I
we
wish I
will
was
be
there.
sharing the videos of Attorney
I
Pizarro
also wanted
to
to
everyone
congratulate
present, as
my
well
fellow
as the rest
honorees.
of our
I would have loved to meet such
Filipino
inspiring
community
women.
in our directory. Maraming salamat po, Ms. Pizarro. I know
I
you may be
also wanted
watching us right now
to
on
tell you a little bit
Facebook.
about myself.
Maraming salamat for
and
your video presentation. And like we've mentioned earlier, we will be sharing this with the rest of our kababayan through our social media page. And now to end our program, I'd like to call Consul General Cato on stage to hand over our plaques, the Sinagtala Award, which we are awarding for the first time in this year, 2022. So I will be reading the text of the plaque, and we will be starting with our first awardee, Attorney Antonio. The Sinagtala Award for Attorney Mayrish Kadapan Antonio reads, for her exemplary achievements in the field of law and leadership training, thus serving as an inspiration for the Filipino-American community and Filipino women worldwide, given this 30th day of March 2022, signed by Consul General Elmer G. Cato. Maraming pong salamat, Attorney Antonio, and congratulations. And we'd also like to thank Attorney Antonio for traveling all the way from Massachusetts just to join us here. Thank you very much, Attorney Antonio. Our second Sinagtala awardee is Attorney Concepcion A. Montoya. This award is for her exemplary achievements in the field of employment law and consumer protection defense, thus serving as an inspiration for the Filipino-American community and Filipino women worldwide, given this 30th day of March by Consul General Elmer G. Cato. Congratulations po, Attorney Montoya. Our third honoree is Ms. Nicole Silianteng. For her exemplary achievements in the field of product design, technology, and innovation, thus serving as an inspiration for the Filipino-American community and Filipino women worldwide, given this 30th day of March, signed Consul General Elmer G. Cato. Congratulations, Nicole. And finally, we have something for our moderator. Thank you so much, Ms. Lorna L.J. Reyes, for moderating our discussions this evening. Maraming salamat po, Ms. Reyes. And Consul General, stay put. We will be having a group photo with all our honorees and our moderator. Yes, it would be better for you guys to hold your plaques. Maraming salamat po. Congratulations once again to our Sinagtala awardees. Thank you, Ms. Reyes, for moderating our discussions. Maraming salamat po sa lahat ng mga dumalo dito sa Kalayaan Hall, pati na rin po sa mga nakinig through Facebook Live. Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat and stay safe. At mabuhay ang ating mga kababaihan.